Welcome CSE 200 class to part 2 of our first PHP exercise. Nothing too exciting happening so far, but we just wanted to make sure that you could connect and you had things in the right folder. Where we made a folder called ex4. There's an index.php page inside there. One thing I just want to point out about it, I'm going to go back to brackets, and I'm just going to, this was already saved, and keep in mind when you work in brackets that even though you could click on the file and see it, I usually like to double click on it because then it shows it up here, and then you can click on it to close it, or if you have a little dot there, it means it's not saved. So if you do a Command S or Control S, you could save it. So that wasn't saved yet, so I saved it. But then you could also close it from there. So that shows you your working files out here, even though you can click on it here. But I think it's probably more, I guess, makes more sense when you double click on it. So this is our file so far. Nothing exciting here. One thing I just want to point out, and I'm going to just do a file save as and save a kind of a copy of it. And I'm going to call this one, instead of PHP, I'll call it HTML. And it won't look any different. Or does it? Well, yeah, it does look a little different. It still says the same thing, but the color changed in here. And the reason that is because if it's not if it doesn't have the PHP extension, it won't read the PHP. And how I know that is if I basically go back here and refresh, it doesn't show hello world anymore. It still shows the HTML, but it doesn't show the PHP. So, and notice that it does kind of go to HTML over PHP in terms of what's the preference as the home page in an index page. It'll go to HTML first. That's why a lot of times you'll replace your index HTML with an index.php. You don't want to have both there. Okay, so back in brackets, I'm gonna get rid of this. I'll just right click on this and I'll just hit delete and make sure I just have my index.php. I'll double click on it to open it so it shows up there. And we're gonna put some PHP code in here. Like I said, we have some here already, and I don't really have to do anything with this so far. What I do want to do is connect to our server. Now to do that, we're going to use PHP code. And you might think, well, I have no idea how to connect to a server with PHP. Well, we know a couple things. We know our server is localhost. We know the password is root, and we know some of our database names as well. So those are some things we're going to need to know. And anything else about our database, like the world database or the pirates database or anything else, we'll be able to connect to by using the same kind of queries that we used with MySQL, except they'll just be embedded in the PHP. Now, first of all, let's just connect. That's all we're going to do right now is we're just going to connect. And to learn how to connect, we're going to go back to w3schools.com. We'll go to the PHP tutorial. And over here, we're going to scroll down. There's a lot of information about just the PHP language, but we're going to scroll down and we're going to look for information about the MySQL database. And they even have some information here about MySQL, which we know because we even have an SQL area right in here to do that. So we don't have to read too much about MySQL. What we do want to do, we want to look at some of these topics like connect, because they'll have some code here to show us how to connect. They'll have built-in functions that will connect to a MySQL database, which is exactly what we want to do. And before we run queries or do anything else or add or delete records from a database, we need to connect to it and we need to confirm that we're connected to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to use something called MySQLi, and it says here I stands for improve. It's just a new version that they use through PHP to connect. So it's just some updated code. So when you go through here, we're actually going to use the one, you'll see that they'll give you a couple options. They'll say you can use the object-oriented or you can use the procedural. We're going to use the procedural. It's still the MySQLi that we're going to use. So whenever you see MySQL, it's going to have a little I in there. And we're going to use this connect. And I'm just going to copy this right now. I'm going to just copy this code underneath the tags. And I'm going to create a connection here. I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to go back to brackets. Now, we'll put our own tags in here. So I'm just going to hit return. I'm going to put an opening tag just so you get used to writing an opening tag. And remember, it has the question mark. And it says PHP. It could be lowercase. And then I'll also put a closing one as well. And that has the question mark and the greater than sign. So there's our PHP tag. So inside here, we're going to write some code. And actually, we're not going to write. I'm just going to paste it. So I'll paste in the code. And you'll see a couple things it has here. What these are in PHP, you might have seen these before if you work with JavaScript. They're variables. And all the variables in PHP have a $sign. So hopefully you read some of that when you looked at the first couple sections in the PHP tutorial. So these are variables, and they represent, we're going to use a variable called server name to represent localhost. And we're going to use a variable called username to represent username and password to represent password. So these variables are going to represent, because it'll just be easier to pass the information along. We're going to use variables to represent and to store data for other elements as we pass them along. It just makes code easier to write when we use a variable. It's just shorter sometimes. Like right here, here's another one. This $con, that's just a variable that represents this connection. It's almost like a method. It's like a little kind of function here. But what that's doing is connecting to the server name, to the username, to the password. You could even put the database in here, but just for now, it's just using those three elements. It's just running a little connection here, and the variable is going to represent that. So then if we say, well, if it's connected, if we check if it's connected, we don't have to run this thing again. We'll just use the variable to represent that. So it kind of stands for something. That's what one purpose of a variable. It just kind of represents something else. So it's representing these names here. Now, our username is not username. It's representing root, because that's our real password is root, or a real username is root, and the password's root. So we have root localhost. Now this could be server name. Sometimes you might see it written as host name. These can be whatever you want, but I'll leave it as server name right now, because that's what they have in here, and they're using it again here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little connection here. Now it's going to connect, but you won't know it's connected if it connects. So even if I save this and I go and take a look at it again in my first page here, I connect. Now I see hello world, so I know that it's reading PHP, but I don't know if it connected to the database or not. How would I know that? I only know that it's just kind of, echoing this code right on the page. So we want to make sure that it's connecting, and there's some in this code that they're showing here. They also have a check connection. Remember, these are comments. These little / are single line comments, and they're kind of showing what they do. The first one it creates the connection, and this one checks the connection. Now before I do this, I want to kind of do something on your own just to try it out before we start using just copying and pasting code, because you don't learn a lot from pasting code. What we want to do is we want to go in here and just see if we have a connection, and just try to use our logic to try and figure it out. So I'm going to go back to brackets, and what we're going to do just to see how it works is right underneath here, I'm just going to say if. We're going to do a conditional statement. So the way conditional statements work is it's basically like if else. If some condition is met, then something happens, and then if the condition is not met, then something else happens. That's the else. So the condition happening is basically if we can just put in con, and it's really what it would be is it would just be if con is true. And we could do this. We could put this in here. We don't even need this. We could just put if con, but we can, because it's kind of, if you just put if con, it's kind of already assuming that you mean it's true. It's kind of like a known. If you don't put anything there, it just means if that variable is true. But we can put equals true. Equals means is it equivalent to being true. Whereas when we use an equal sign here, that's basically like an assignment. These are equal signs are assignments. We're assigning a variable to that string. We're assigning a variable to that string. We're assigning a variable to that method that's being run there. So, but this is testing equivalency. So we're saying, well, if this is equal to that, so equals is actually a true equals. And then what we do is we put two curly braces, and a pair of curly braces. So I'm going to do a pair here. And the first condition, if it's true, we're just going to echo something. I'm going to echo, and then in quotes, we're going to put connected. And we can even put connected to, and I could put in server name, because then we know at least we're connected to the right server, and it should show up as localhost. It should kind of, because server name represents localhost, so it should kind of put that in there. So we'll try that out. We'll put in server name, and I could even put a period at the end. Now we may want to concatenate this at some point, but right now I think this should work like this with it being in quotes. That should work. I'm going to leave it like this just to start, and I'll just save it and just see what happens. I'll see what happens right now. I'll go back to my ex4 page, and I got the localhost page isn't working, so I'm not even seeing if it's connected. I'm getting like, when you see this means you have an error in your code. Something's wrong with your code, with your PHP code, and it could be a little thing or a big thing. So something's wrong in the code. So I'm going to go back and check what's wrong in the code. I did something wrong. Now, one thing, if you look at some of these things, these all have semicolons when they end. This has a semicolon when it ends. This does not. So let me see if that's the problem. Maybe I need a semicolon. Let me put a semicolon and see if that's the problem. I'll save it. And there we go. Connected to localhost. So it's already connected. So we had our first kind of problem solving there. We need a semicolon. And sometimes they're not as important, but in PHP it's very important. It breaks everything. It doesn't even try to read the file if we have one little bit of code that doesn't work in there. So it says connected to server name. And what I'm going to do is I'll also put a condition. We only have one condition if it's true. What about if it's not? I'm going to put else. And else doesn't require any condition. See, the condition is here. Connection equals true, or I could even delete that and just say if connection. And basically, if it's true, it's going to say connected. If not, I'm going to have to put another pair of curly braces and put some kind of action or statement that's going to happen if it doesn't connect. So if it doesn't connect, we could just put, how about failed to connect? I'll try that. I'll put an exclamation point, and then I'll put a semicolon there. I'll save it, and I'll run it. Now, of course, I did that on purpose. I did something wrong with the code. What did I do wrong with the code? Well, you can see right here, I didn't echo it. I just put the line there. I got to make sure I echo it and put the string here in quotes. And then it finishes off. See, now all the colors are back to normal again. So I have to make sure I echo that. So failed to connect. So if I save that and try it out again, I'll refresh it. Now it works. Now, one thing you might want to try is we'll try to make it not connect. Let's say I have the password wrong. Let's say I put my password is boot instead of root. I'll save it. I'll go back to my browser, and now it says failed to connect. So I know it's working. So sometimes it's good to try and break it and see what doesn't work. So that works. If I just took out the T from username and I save it, it's definitely going to tell me it's going to fail to connect. So just a couple little things. So I always recommend try to break it first. So this is a little connect kind of script. And again, we did this on our own here. We just did an if-else statement. We used to do those in ActionScript. You could do it in JavaScript. It's basically, it's a conditional statement. If something happens, do this. If it doesn't happen, do that. And you could switch these around. Sometimes they'll have something happens where if it doesn't connect. Now that's what they have. If I go back to the W3 Schools version, they have some code here, and I can copy all this code to put in here. I don't want to do that, but they have code here, so I might as well copy and paste it in. I did want to try it the other way, but I'll replace what I did. And you might say, well, what's the difference? Why use their code? They have something here that says if, and it has an exclamation point in front of con, our variable, and that means the opposite of. When you see that exclamation point, that means the opposite of. So that means if it doesn't connect, it does this method called die. It has die, connection failed, and then it's appending this mysqli connect error. Now it's running this little function here that's actually going to give you an error message. So that's why this is a little more beneficial than just doing connected, not connected. Then if you use this one, if it doesn't work, like I have root here, so I'll leave that like that, and I'll run it. I'll go back to my ex4. I'll run it, and then it says connection failed, access denied for user root. So it's kind of telling me what the problem is. So by having that extra little function that's running there, that kind of helps us, by doing that. It gives us a little something extra than just saying if else. So I'll go back to my code. So this helps. So using some of their stuff is kind of helpful, but you need to know why it's being used and why it's beneficial. You might think, well, why not just run an if else statement? But here's what it does. So and you could change these things. You could put the name of the server in there, connection failed to the server, whatever you need to do. So that's the first part. That's the very first part of what we're doing, is just connecting. So we're creating the connection, we're checking the connection. What we're going to do next is we're going to be connecting to the database itself. So we also want to connect to the database. So that's what we're going to be doing next. But let me take a break here, and then we'll move on to part 3.